Hi, guys. So happy you could join us today. I'm joined by Jen Pasquale, who is an Army spouse and an organizational development consultant. We've had the best time chatting, and I have already kind of like planted a seed for the last question I'm going to ask Jen. So I'm really excited because for those of you who are facing a transition in the next year or so, this is going to be really important for you. Stick through to the end and hear Jen's question. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you, Sue. Happy to be here.
I'm thrilled to be here chatting with you. So, in your highlight, which I hope everybody has read, you offered military spouses the advice that they should start early. Can you expand upon that a little bit?
Yeah, so as you may know, and others may know, I've been in the transition space for a long time, helping support spouses in transition. So it's funny that now I am myself in the transition space. And so I have often said, start early, start early. And I think it really wasn't until I got in it that I really started to appreciate what that would look like from the inside. So I think for me, it's really about noticing that as spouses, I think we are so accustomed to making sure everyone else is settled, no matter what the transition has been, different moves and different seasons of life. It's really kind of, I would say, easy and almost like habitual to put ourselves at the end of that kind of to-do list for settling in. And so I think transition is a place where to the extent possible, start as early as you can and try not to make yourself at the end of the list. Because I think it's possible, and I'm seeing this for myself, to do both support for the people around you and figuring out what do you need for the next season. It doesn't mean you're going to have to figure it all out. And I think that was the part I didn't fully understand, is I felt like we could do all these things ahead of time. There's some stuff you're just not going to know till you're in the middle of it, and that's okay. But do what you can to figure out what you're going to need as early as you can, so that it's a little bit less bumpy along the way. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense because I would tell people that 2 years is not too early
Mm-mm.
because there are a lot of things that I'm like live and die by a checklist. And I tell everybody that they should be keeping a spreadsheet. Like when they come up with a resource that they're gonna, oh, I need to remember that for transition. I'm like, drop it in the spreadsheet. And then like maybe categorize it. Like, is this something you're gonna need 6 months from transition or like 2 years or a year, whatever. And then later on, I think the time to gather resources is not when you need them. It's like you said, like start early, right? Because there's so many things that are gonna be like just thrown at you when you're going through the process, that if you could take some of those top level things off your list well in advance, it's just gonna give you so much more breathing room. It's just going to give you less anxiety because you're not worried about missing something, right? Because you've been tracking earlier. So I think what you
Yeah.
said is brilliant. It makes absolute sense.
Well, and I can add another layer, which is I think what I didn't fully appreciate is how much there's really two layers to the process, right? There's all the resources and what I consider like the actions and the steps that we have to take. And then there's this human side of transition, right? Like, what is my identity going to look like on the other side of being an active duty service spouse? What is our family's identity going to look like? Those are questions I think we can start asking a little earlier. And it's really about intentionality and carving the time with your spouse, with your family, to have those like sometimes harder conversations of, well, who's going to be the priority from, a professional perspective? The military's going to take in
Yeah.
the front seat. Is your job, is the service member's job going to still take the front seat and be kind of the default, or are we going to balance that out? Is mine going to be the primary? Like, those are all conversations that I think have so much value in the years leading up to transition. And I think sometimes we sit on those because we don't know what we don't know yet. We're not really sure what to ask or what to think about. I think it's just the early part is also about just opening that communication channel as early as possible, so that even if it's just, hey, I had this random thought today, what if this, just being able to have the dialogue as early as possible, I think can help prevent you from having to have all the dialogues all in that kind of year of transition, which already has a lot on its plate.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the toughest questions for people that they don't think about, and it always amazes me, they don't think about it until it's upon them. But if you're, like you emphasize the importance of getting the whole family involved to maintain a good line of communication all throughout the whole process and probably throughout the whole career. But people are always stymied by the question, where are you going to live?
Hmm.
And I think some people, it's going to be directed by where they get a job. Great. But I mean, other people can choose and look for a job in that location. I mean, and I know that you guys decided that you and your kids would pre-position yourselves in the DMV ahead of retirement, DC, Maryland, Virginia. I
Hmm.
mean, but what did those conversations look like for you all? And like, I mean, was it taking a look at where you might want to be post-retirement? What was involved in the decision-making process?
Yeah, so that was kind of a weird circumstance where we got in a situation that we weren't anticipating, where my husband was in command of a unit. In the middle of that command, that unit was repositioned back to Korea. And so he had to go to Korea halfway through, and that was not what we were expecting. So we were in Washington State, didn't really have a huge community out there in the middle of COVID. We had one kind of friend down the street who was moving at the end of the summer. And so we kind of looked at each other and said, well, what are we coming? Are we not? Like, do we go with you? Do we stay here? Do we go back to the East Coast where we have family both in North Carolina and Massachusetts? We at least have some people where the time zones were better. Like, we factored that in because we realized his ability to stay connected to the kids was a lot harder on the West Coast just because of the way the time change work. Um, he would always need to talk to them in the middle of the school day. Like, that wasn't going to work. And so like that was a factor. So we looked at a lot of different things, but to your point, we also looked at, well, if, we weren't sure if he wanted to kind of, hang up his hat or not. He wasn't quite sure, but we were getting closer to that conversation. And so it was like, well, if we roll the dice and go to somewhere where we know there's opportunity for you, opportunity for me, and support if needed during this year of separation, maybe that makes the most sense. And for us, we'd done DoDEA before. We didn't have a good experience with that. We really didn't want to do that again to our then rising high schooler. And so school was a big factor. So there was a lot of layers to the decision, but it also included what could the future look like? And, could we pre-position in DC? Could we give the kids some additional stability, give me a jump start on whatever's next for me? And give you a place to find a job where there's a lot of jobs. So
Yeah.
it seemed like that was, versus going, to some small base somewhere, like this was where potentially he would have the greatest ability to come join us, which was, of course, the goal once his assignment was over.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for people to think about too, because this is not a decision that's made overnight. This takes iterative conversations, I think. And they're not easy decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, the sooner you start, like you said, the better, because I mean, we talked about it a little bit, and our son also drove our decision to, retire here, or stay here when, we decided to geobatch here when my husband was still in the military, because he turned to us one day and said, I don't really want to move. I really like it here. I like my schools. I like my friends. And I'm like, I'm with you. My family's here. Let's just stay here. And, and then from that point on, we geobatched for several assignments, and deployments. And we didn't regret it, but that was definitely a conversation we had to have. And that was, to get everybody on the same page. We could talk all day about this, but, like, I just, I read your highlight. And so something that you wrote in your highlight that really resonated with me was that you said that the biggest struggle of your career has been feeling like you're standing still in your career more than you would have liked to. And I think a lot of us feel like that. And it also, it's frustrating because you don't always know how to deal with it. So, I mean, how do you deal with that?
It depends on the day.
Right.
It's interesting. My husband and I had a conversation months ago, and it was one of those conversations where all of a sudden you say something and you hear it out loud, and you realize, oh, that's the thing. And for me, it was realizing that I was feeling like, because I had kind of downshifted my career and followed, our military life around the world, that what if I wasn't going to have time to really know what my potential was and really be able to get to the top of, my field, whatever I saw that as, right? I was certainly very driven and motivated when we met, and I was on this kind of what I would have considered like this trajectory, right? This very clear, path. And it was kind of sitting with the fact that I was struggling around my potential. And I felt like I just hadn't had the ability to really figure out what that was. And that was a weird thing to hear out loud, and just a weird thing for me to kind of sit with, because so much of what we had done over these 20 years was helping him lean into his potential. And
Right.
so it was recognizing that, well, okay, what does it look like now that we have the flexibility? What does it look like for me to do the same? And will I even have the time at almost 50 to get to like that potential, whatever that would be? And it's, in some ways, it's, as time has passed, it's become this thing I don't focus on as much and I don't think about as much, but it also was this realization of like, that was the cost to some extent. And part of that's the field I was in. It just didn't have the ability to progress in the same kind of way, without stability. But it progressed in other ways. And so I know, like we've talked about, the fact that at the end of the day, I'm kind of okay with that, because I don't necessarily know what choices I would have made anyway, right? Maybe I would have taken time out of my work and professional life to be a full-time parent
Mhm.
anyway. And so perhaps some of those changes weren't military induced. They were just life. They were just choices. They were just, decisions that we made as a family based on what we thought was best. And so I think I had to like have my own time to like process that and think about that and decide what I wanted my mindset to be on it. And I think now I've gotten to a better place where I can recognize that all those twists and turns, they've all led me to something that I really enjoy and I'm really happy with. And maybe I don't get to the top of whatever this is, but maybe that's okay. And maybe I don't really care anymore. Maybe I'm really more focused on, what does our retirement look like? What does our like real retirement on the other side of having professional lives look like? And how soon can we get there? Like it's now I have a different lens for all of it.
And I also, I mean, in the interest of giving ourselves a little bit more grace, I think that just in my case, where I think I'm standing still, I think that the reality is I'm not standing still, because if I were more objective about it, I would look and, just check out my LinkedIn every once in a while just for an objective view and realize, oh, somewhere along the way, I managed to do some stuff.
Mhm.
I think we're just hard on ourselves because we're sitting still, we're sitting in it and doing it, that it just, of course, it looks like we're standing still, especially when we compare ourselves to others, which I think,
Mhm.
and it's so funny because, like, you read those like those sayings that they, embroider on pillows and stuff. You're like, what is that? Comparison is a thief of joy. But I remember that
Yep.
one all the time because I'm like, that's
Mhm.
so flipping true. Because I think that's when I feel the worst, is when I'm comparing myself to somebody else and where they are in their careers. And I think that's, as you just said, it's the wrong lens to use,
Mhm.
because it's unrealistic.
Well, and I think in the military space, there is this, I don't know, just sort of narrative that, we've given up all these things and there's all this sacrifice, which I'm not saying there's not. I certainly can say that I've, had to make choices I didn't expect to have to make about my
Right.
career. But again, it doesn't mean I might not have made those anyway. And so it's not necessarily standing still. It is just pivoting into something else. I'm standing still on that road. I might not ever progress on that particular road, but I've now found these other branches that I enjoy just as much and maybe more. And I might not have ever found those branches had I not had to stand still or made the decision to sort of halt that progress on that particular path.
Yeah, the
So I think it's,
zigzags.
yeah, it's about, I think, zooming out. I think sometimes it's easy to sort of zoom in. And I think sometimes, to your point, it's important to like zoom out and say, well, wait a minute, what have I actually done over these 20 years of our life together? Okay, I have definitely not stood still. Like I don't feel that. And so it's just that having to zoom out and remind myself of that in those moments when, to your point, I'm like looking at where I could have been, or what might have been, or
Yeah.
any of those, and just try to be a little bit more holistic in my kind of assessment.
I mean, a foot stomp something you said because it makes so much sense. And I don't think we underlined it enough, which is, if we're measuring ourselves on where we thought we would be,
Hmm.
that's a horrible
Yes.
measure, because where we thought we would be is this line, and where we actually are might not even be on the same line, because it might just be a parallel line. Because I know that I thought I was going to be doing something in the international sphere, because I have degrees in international relations, and if I measure myself on that line, I would be an abysmal failure, because I've done
Hmm.
nothing on that line. But I've done other things on a different line,
Yeah. Well, I mean, in some ways, where we thought we would be never actually existed.
Right.
Like we
Okay,
we
now
made
we're
it
getting
up.
into like an existential conversation. We don't need to go here for now because I mean we could do this like all our life. I think I'm gonna ask the last question,
Sure.
and then after we say goodbye to everybody else, let's have a chat. Um, so I think my last question to you, because you are, your husband is coming up on retirement, is now that you're in that, like you've helped so many people, but now that you're in this space and you
Mhm.
have less than a year to go, like what has been the biggest challenge? What are you looking forward to the most? Or like what do you wish you'd started on earlier or wish you
Mm.
earlier? I'll let you answer any or all of those.
There's a lot of that. There's a lot in there too. I think there's some easy tactical ones, right? So some easy actions I would have done sooner is, and everybody talks about it, but it's life insurance, because it is never going to be cheaper than it is in whatever day you're in, right? It gets more expensive by the day. So that is something I would have pushed for sooner, as getting those replacements in place earlier and not waiting for that. So that's one thing. And then I think from a career perspective, if I kind of take it in a few buckets, like from a career perspective, I don't know. Part of me would say I would have done things differently, and part of me would say I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And so, on my good days, I think I'm leaning more into that. But I do think what I didn't necessarily develop as well as I wish I had is just really having a better sense of what I really want, what I really am looking for, what I really need, and what are the steps that I need to make sure those things happen. My husband's always been super supportive, but you can only support someone who like has a plan or has an idea or has a goal or has a whatever, right? So I think I wish I had spent a little more time digging, like uncovering that and figuring out what that might have looked like for me sooner. It's hard to say if it would have made a difference, because again, maybe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. But I think listen to that voice. If there's a voice that's telling you want something else on the other side of transition, then I would start like doing the work to dig through that a little bit early, and not feel like, well, once we get everybody else settled, then I'll come back to what that voice is telling me. Like listen to that voice as early as you can and try to support it as early as you can. Um, I think, in terms of like I wouldn't say I'm like, there's not anything that I'm like afraid of, if you will. I mean, I'm super excited about having not a real partner, but like a partner in every sense, right? Everything, being able to have him have full control over like our life, our
Mhm.
decisions, what we do. Like, I think that will just bring an interesting twist to our 20 years of marriage, that I'm looking forward to. And I'm looking forward to seeing kind of what that is for him. I think one of the things that I've noticed that might be interesting or useful to folks is I'm noticing how much I struggle with not being the default. So I think working through that a little sooner might be useful. It's something we're kind of working through now, where as an example, right, there's something the kids need, somewhere they need to go. I am sort of, and I do this, right? This is not him. I assume it's on me unless my calendar has a conflict. And then I go to him and say, hey, can you pick up the slack here? And he says, yes, and we're good to go. That is military training, if you will, I think largely, right? Because of solo parenting for so many years. And so one of the things I really want to work on is get to where here's the need, who wants to take it, right? It is one bucket, and we both pull from it equally, and we both look at it equally. And I don't kind of play the default just by my nature. Instead, I kind of let us both show up equally, because he's capable of being that partner. And I think I'm capable of like giving up the control of it. So I think it's figuring out what that looks like. That's my goal for the next 8 months while he's transitioning, is what does that look like? So when he really does have full control and has a lot more flexibility in his schedule, how do we do that together? And how do we do that without kind of the military life baggage?
You sound ridiculously well adjusted. I think I'm jealous. We did not do transition that well, or that we were not that well adjusted through transition. It was rough for us. And
It's
but
rough
it
for so many
prepared.
people.
Yeah,
It's
and we
that, and that's,
prepare. Yeah.
yeah. Like we think nobody knows what you're going to need till you're in it. You can think, and this was my big lesson, is I thought I knew. I thought I understood what our rubs would be, what our challenges would be. They came out of left field. I could not have predicted them. So what I've learned is it's not about knowing all the things. It's about making sure the underlying tools like communication, like conflict, like, all those things about a marriage and a family, that's where the work is beneficial, because
Mhm.
then you can handle whatever comes, because you
Yes.
can't predict it. You just can't. There is
Yes.
no checklist big enough for all the
No.
things that could happen.
Nope. And I think the only checklist that you deal with, like, just deal with what you can, because life is going to throw so much at you during transition that if there's anything you can get rid of up front, to
Go
get
for it.
go for it, do it.
Yeah.
But no, this has been awesome, and we are going to continue the conversation. But I'm going to say goodbye to you guys because I don't want to keep you too long. So I hope that you come back next week and hear from another fabulous military spouse. I want to thank USAA for making these conversations possible. And with that, I will say goodbye and see you back here next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.